This podcast is brought to you by LMU Munich.
Hello everybody and welcome back to our afternoon talk. Daniele Procida will start first 11 years, 8 deployments and a very important lesson. Thank you very much, Daniele.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've had a nice rest after your lunch. So I'm going to be talking about deployment. Why can't Python be as easy to deploy as PHP? I'll tell you a little bit about myself, but first I would like to say thank you very much to the organizers of this event, of course, for inviting me, but also for organizing it. And doing an event for the first time is always a gamble and a risk, so they've taken a chance on the Python community in setting up this new conference. It's been a success, and I hope it continues to be a success. When you do something like this, it's like holding a party and just hoping that everybody's going to turn up, and you don't know that your party is going to be a success until people actually turn up for it. So thank you very much to the organizers. Thank you also to all of the volunteers that you see in the yellow shirts, who are, of course, also organizers. Before you leave, make sure you say thank you in person to at least one of them. So please just thank you to volunteers and organizers before doing it. So that's what I look like. My name is Daniele Procida. I work at Divio. We produce cloud hosting tools and services for Python and Django developers, so that they don't have to be system operators or administrators. Our website, divio.com, and follow us on Twitter because we're really interesting there. We're also sponsoring this conference, which is, so I'm very pleased to work for a company that's very supportive of projects and communities in the Python world. I'm heavily involved in Django. I'm a core developer of the Django project, and I am a board member of the Django Software Foundation. You're very welcome to email me or contact me on Twitter or whatever you like to do, or just come and talk to me afterwards. In fact, if you come and talk to me afterwards and you're interested in what I have to say, if I have time to do a demo, then I can even arrange some discounts for you, but we can talk about that later. So, what works? Well, today, I'm a pragmatist, and there are plenty of other contexts in which I'm a very rigid absolutist. But right now, I just want to be a pragmatist. And as a pragmatist, which is only a temporary condition, the question that's important to ask about technology or tools is, does it work? Do they work for the person who is using them? So there's an expression in English, 17th century proverb, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. You've probably heard this expression. It means that it doesn't matter how insightful your understanding of cookery is, or how sophisticated your kitchen tools are, or even how good a cook you are, the only way to judge how good your pudding is by eating it. And so, like all pragmatic ideas, it takes a shortcut to the outcomes, to the results. You may have also heard this as well, the proof is in the pudding. Well, that's gibberish, okay? And, why might a proof be in a pudding? That seemed to have emerged in America in about the 1920s. Are there any Americans here? I know there was some earlier. Well, no, you can't be held responsible. Any Americans, please stop doing that. It just doesn't make any sense at all. So, here's a question. Is Python better than PHP for the web? No. Well, okay, let's do a little test then. So, please put your hand up if you consider that for web development, Python is better than PHP. Yeah, okay. And, no, just keep your hands up. And keep your hand up if you think that opinion is based on something other than prejudice. Is it based on experience or understanding or expert knowledge? Okay, well, I'm sorry to give you some bad news, which is that your opinion is irrelevant. I'm not even saying you're wrong, but your opinion is irrelevant, because the only thing that matters when you're asking a question about whether something is better is what people find in practice works for them. So don't feel very bad about having irrelevant opinions, okay? So I was not very impressed with the Harry Potter phenomenon, because clearly these books have been written by an author of outstanding imagination and storytelling powers, but the writing is banal, and the characterization and the plotting is weak, and they are schematic and obvious and shallow. But guess what? My opinion and my reasons for holding that opinion are absolutely irrelevant, because whatever I think, for whatever reason, Harry Potter captured the imagination of millions of children and people who are not children, and it fired that imagination, and it gave a generation of children motivation to be interested in books. It brought a generation of children to the excitement of reading. So the opinions of a middle-aged misery guts like me don't count for anything. They are irrelevant. Harry Potter worked, and what I mean is that for the people who needed it, the people it was made for, it gave them something of genuine value. It empowered and liberated them. It made their lives better, and they loved it. So if I'm being a pragmatist instead of a miserable critic who happens actually not to have written any best-selling books yet, I'm obliged to admit that if Harry Potter works, then that means it's good and successful. So that's, I think, how we should think about things like Python and PHP. And I'm going to perhaps do that by talking about a few deployments. So about 11 years ago, I created and deployed my very last PHP website. It was built with a little CMS, open source PHP CMS called Website Baker, that was created by an Australian child genius. And I chose it because I liked the logo, and the child genius was really friendly, and they had nice people on the forums. And I built other stuff in PHP and WordPress and Website Baker and MediaWiki and other CMSs, other things I don't even remember the names of. I created sites for myself and hobbies and friends. Some of them are still running today. And it was all very successful and worked very well for everyone. But the important thing is that I didn't know, and in fact I still do not know, any PHP at all whatsoever. This is, in case you don't know this is how you set up a PHP website. You download it into a directory on the server, you add an Apache configuration or web server configuration, you edit a file with some database passwords and other configuration, and that's it. And that's the way every PHP thing that I used seemed to work. And in my case, it made me, empowered, productive, successful, and so on. Which means that it was good because it worked. And I didn't need to know any PHP at all. And I never did learn any PHP, but thousands of people had the same starting point as me and became successful PHP programmers, just in the same way that millions of children enjoyed Harry Potter and got into books. And even those who didn't become programmers, like me, they benefited from being able to use it, even without knowing how to program in it. So on this measure, PHP was successful and good. What about Python? I discovered Python and Django when I was working at Cardiff University School of Medicine a few years after that. We needed a better web CMS than the one we had that had cost the university about £1 or £2 million. And for some reason, we thought that we could create one better ourselves in Django. So I'd learned a bit of Commodore 64 BASIC in the 1980s, so I thought, well, how hard can it be? And we chose Django for it. We chose Django because I thought it had a nice name and I liked the color of the website. Now, I said this before and people always laugh, but I swear to you that is true. We used Django CMS, which was at the time a new, nice little open source CMS. And we got to work. And I remember the first day that we got Django running, because people came running into our office to see what all the shouting and cheering was about. And we were shouting and cheering because it had taken us a couple of days, and finally we'd got to that. In other words, we'd managed to get the Django run server going after 2 days. We're not actually at a deployment yet. So, unlike me, I had a colleague who was a programmer of some experience, but not a Python programmer, and it took us 2 days. So it's a good thing that I really like the color of the website and so on, because otherwise I would have written a completely different 52-page report justifying the use of Django for our project. So we persevered, and by the autumn of 2009, we had deployed Django for real in a production website. And I'd learned enough Python to be able to build some real applications that did real work, and we were ready to go. So there's our second deployment, our first live deployment of Python, and that really was an experience for us, because it wasn't a bit like working with PHP, it was like this. We had to put the Django applications onto the server, not into the web server directory like in PHP, but deep inside some obscure site packages directory. We had to set up a gateway between Nginx and the applications. We had to configure Django applications to put their static assets in the right directories. I'm not going to go through all this, but we needed expert help to do this, paid expert help, and it took us a long time to get to grips with how it worked. But finally, our applications were online, and we had a real live Django website running, professionals. So you can't imagine how pleased we were with ourselves. And of course, very soon we needed to replicate the deployment, to have a development server. So, which meant, in our case, because we didn't know any better, following a series of steps to rebuild the entire system by hand, from installing Linux all the way up through the stack to the Python applications. I did this literally dozens of times, because often, while developing, I'd find myself on the server in a situation that I couldn't back out of. And the easiest solution always seemed to be to rebuild the entire server, then work backwards. Eventually, I discovered really obscure things like Python virtual environments, which made things a whole lot easier and saved a lot of server rebuilding. And now redeployment could simply mean pointing the web server configuration at a different virtual environment. This stuff may seem obvious to you, and in a way it seems even obvious to me now, but that's after acquiring this knowledge in a way that took some time and some effort. And I really wanted to make this work. But if you're somebody who's used to something quite different, that works in a very different way and is much easier, this might be a barrier that they don't get past. Up until this point, everything that I was doing was in that single server environment, Debian Linux with MySQL and Nginx, and I didn't have any idea how I could deploy those applications on a different server environment, for example, on a different hosting service. Again, that was something that I had to work out. It's not so easy to find, or certainly wasn't then so easy to find, good Django hosting services compared to, for example, PHP. And you'll notice if you follow Django email lists and IRC channels that this is a very familiar question. Most people want to be able to use hosting services because they don't want to be system administrators. We chose Django Europe because it had Django in the name, and I like the color of the website. And finally, I'd worked out how to deploy the same applications but on a completely different server environment. And I found I was able to publish a couple of hobby sites of my own in Django on a system that I no longer had to be the system administrator for. But up to this point, all the development work I was doing was being done on the server. That was my development environment. I didn't work locally at all because I didn't really understand how to get all this stuff set up on my Macintosh. I've had steps that worked for Linux, but I couldn't do it on a Mac. And to replicate that stack on the Macintosh seemed to be much harder to do with Python and Django than it did when I was doing stuff with PHP. Eventually, that too was something that I learned how to do, and I learned how to do things a bit more properly, like, for example, having project dependencies in the requirements file, and all the application code and project files versioned in Git, and the database passwords published to GitHub only occasionally. So it's not automated deployment, but getting there. And so, in a way, Python deployment is not actually so hard, but let's not congratulate ourselves too much, because I had another experience with PHP more recently. Remember that website Baker project I mentioned? Well, I needed to move it off the ancient virtual server that it was running on. So I had another look at website Baker. It had continued developing in the intervening decade. I thought the new logo wasn't as good as the old one, and I was shocked and surprised when I discovered that the Australian child genius had grown up. In fact, I didn't want to install a new version. I just wanted to transfer the old site. So this is what I did. I copied the files from one server to another and the database. I pointed the web server configuration at the directory, and that was it, and the site was running. I simply copied a 10-year-old CMS application and all of its content to a new server, and it just worked. And there were many questions I didn't need to ask about versions of PHP or dependencies, and it just didn't matter. In fact, I couldn't answer them. So in PHP, we have a system where you just grab stuff from one place and put it in another, and it just seems to work. And that is what Python is up against as an opponent, if you like, in this, as a rival in this field of web deployment. Python's older than PHP. It's got something like 4 years of head start. And I can't help feeling that it should be easier than this to deploy Python applications and websites. So no wonder that PHP is all over the web and there are so many PHP programmers. It's because PHP works. And in one sense at least, PHP works better than Python, because the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Never mind how good the language is, how good the tools are, the question is, does it enable people to do what they want to do? Now, I know it's not that simple. I know that Python is inherently more secure. I know the things that make WordPress so easy to deploy, the hit a button to upgrade functionality, also represents horrific security vulnerabilities. I know that applications that can upload executables into public server directories are a nightmare. So maybe we're facing an unavoidable trade-off between ease of use and security, where you've got, for example, PHP's file system access that makes things so obvious, and Python's abstraction that takes you some effort to get over. Now, after some years of thinking, maybe Python should move on and become easier, I'm beginning to think that maybe there is no way around this, and all we can do is choose where we're going to be on that line. So in that case, if we can't make Python easier to deploy, can we make it easier to deploy Python? In other words, if Python itself can't be changed to make it easier to deploy on the web, can we instead invent better ways to deploy Python? And this is what various people or other companies providing services are trying to do. So we have companies like Django Europe providing one-click Django installations, or Python Anywhere, with another example, or companies like DigitalOcean, not Python specialists, but still offering one-click Django installations. And the company that I work for, Devio, we also have a solution. I've got time for a very quick demo, perhaps. So I don't want this to be, I don't want to abuse a talk like this to promote things. I just want to show you a workflow that we have that I think, that I'm really proud that we've developed, that helps bridge this gap between security and ease. And so let's have a look at the final deployment on the DVO cloud. Our attempt to make Python deployment easier. So let me struggle with my monitor configurations. Let's put it on there. Yes, I want that. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to our website, which is not that one. It's there. And I'm going to add a new project on the DVO. That's where. Okay. Somebody should have said. And I tested this earlier. And okay, let's go back to this resolution. That will have to do. Okay. Okay, I'm on the dvo.com control panel, and I'm going to add a new project. And I'm going to call it something like PyCon Web Demo 4. And I'm going to, sorry, this is just, I had this working earlier, so it must work now. That's how computers work, isn't it? So it was on here, and let's try this again. Ah, that's more like it. Okay, thank you. And where is my window gone? Never mind, let's create a new one quick. Okay. So, oh, for goodness sake. Here we are. Let's we're creating a new project here. I'm going to make sure it's a Python 3 project because I'm a modern kind of fellow. It'll be a Django project, and that's great, and I'm going to hit create. Now, I made one earlier, so we didn't have to waste too much time waiting for this. So, here's one already that I have set up, and I'm going to deploy it. Okay, so this is now deploying on our test server in its Docker environment. Meanwhile, I'm going to go to my terminal, and I'm going to pull down one of these previously deployed projects from the from the cloud platform. So I'm going to do DVO project setup, and it's called PyCon Web Demo. And that's now pulling it down onto my computer, and it's going to set it up in exactly the same Dockerized environment that we run in the cloud. So we're bridging this issue of environments here. We've got exactly the same environment running locally that we have in the cloud. So if it works locally, it's pretty much guaranteed, if that's ever possible with computers, to run in the cloud. So give it a moment. So it's doing all the things that the platform would do on the cloud. It's migrated its stuff. It's pulling down. There we are. Okay, so I can cd into the directory and do DVO project up, and it's going to be running locally there on my own Macintosh. I can sign in. There's a little Django site. Okay, so I want to install an application in there. So I'm going to move the polls application, which I had ready, into here, and in here I'm going to, in my settings file, I'm going to add the polls application. In here, I'm going to set up the URLs. And unfortunately, I've only got 1 minute left, so I can't show you everything I wanted to do. But my next steps would be simply to do my development work here locally, and then back in the terminal, I would use Git to push my changes to the cloud, and then I would run DVO project deploy test. And that would start a deployment up here in the in the control panel for the project that I've just been working on. I can show you this later if you like. There you are, it's deploying. So we've got this seamless connection between the two platforms. So let me just wrap this up. I want to leave you with two things. These questions: can we make Python easier to deploy, or do we have to make it easier to deploy Python? And if you want to take away a lesson from this, it's that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and however good you think your tools are, those opinions are irrelevant compared to how well it works for other people. So, any questions? Thank you very much. Sorry, ran out of time there. Yeah.
Do you have any questions? Any questions? Maybe one here?
Develop locally, right? And are the parts mounted in the Docker containers? Is it locally running from the containers as well?
Yes. Yes, so you can use all the tools that you normally use for development on your computer that you're used to using to work on the project inside your local Docker container.
Yeah. It's running reload.
It's running what, sorry?
Is it then running Windows, for example, with the reload switch?
Yes, it will reload and it will do everything that you would expect the run server to do if you were running locally. The only difference is it's in exactly the same environment that you have on the cloud.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Daniele, again, for your speech.